Hey everybody, and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. I'm Beth.
And I'm Kelly.
Hey Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I've had a pretty chill weekend so far. How about you?
Chill is not how I would describe this weekend, but fun and exciting is. I've had a very fun and exciting weekend. It's just been jam-packed. And speaking of jam, I looked out my window and realized that my fig tree is ready to be harvested. And so I'm going to be probably making some more jam coming up. And I don't have time for that. No idea when that's going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of my hobbies had to go to the wayside as as life took over.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I have many a half-finished cross stitch somewhere around the house.
One day when we're famous, those are going to be worth tens of dollars.
Yeah. They all have curse words on them too. So they're all in the middle of like the F word or something where I left off, or the middle of the word bitch. Something like that. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I could finish this later. That person knows that I'll insult them at some point.
I think that'll be a Kelly McCloskey original, will be a foo bit.
Yeah. Yes.
And those are going to go for a lot of money because,
I mean, when I'm rich and famous,
the half-finished curse words are going to be just really
it's a testament
after.
To the way she lived her life.
Yes.
She got everything half done.
Collectors, be aware right now. I mean, just be aware right now.
I will.
Yeah, we'll put them up on the website.
Yeah. So, Beth.
Yes, Kelly.
We had a conversation earlier this week.
Right.
And maybe even last week. Time flies when you're having adult time.
Yes.
So we had a conversation and I had mentioned that I had this epiphany when I was back in Ireland, and we wanted to do the last episode that we did because it was such an interesting article about the implantation of false memories.
Yes.
But we had thought about doing a brand new type of series, and it sounded like you really liked it as well.
I thought I think your idea sounds like a really produced podcast idea. I was like, well, that's a really great idea, but is it a great idea for us?
Well, we're going to see. I guess we'll find out. And we'll see how it works. So if you're a longtime listener, we are just changing up a little bit of the format, but really we're just doing, I guess what we're saying right now is it's just going to be a series for right now to see if it works on fake news makers.
Yes.
And diving deeper into fake news makers. So we'll still be doing fake news, but for right now, we're going to concentrate on some of these really, really awful fake news makers, because so much of what we deal with when we talk about fake news comes from the same people over and over and over. And there are people who laid the groundwork to create these fake news cycles. So that's what we're going to kind of explore a little bit.
Just basically what we're looking at here is some of these people who have contributed to this phenomenon and how it's grown from them. And yeah, we're going to start mapping out the fake news family tree. That's
a really good way to put it. The fake news family tree. Yeah. So I was going to start this week because I think my topic leads into your topic.
Right.
And I guess if we're calling it the fake news family tree, this would kind of be the early root system of that family tree.
So, today, hold on one second. Yeah. So basically, we're going to kind of tell each other about one person or group or something. You're going to tell me about one, and I'm going to tell you about one. We're going to kind of do some stories to each other. So you're going to go first. So you're going to tell me about yours.
That's right. And today I'm going to talk about the John Birch Society.
Ooh, I can't wait. Wait, Birch?
I know, like a tree.
It's like we planned that, but we totally didn't.
But we didn't. We did not. They did not. There was no planning involved with that. There's lots of planning involved with other things, but not with that.
Okay.
Okay, so the John Birch Society, it's a far-right organization. Their original mission was to support anti-communism, the red threat, and limited government. In reality, what they mostly did was just grossly oppose the civil rights movement during the 1960s and 1970s. But it was founded in the 50s by a man called Robert Welsh, who is a billionaire candy maker.
Oh.
I didn't look into the type of candy because I don't want to have to boycott candy. That makes me so sad. And he's way dead, so his money isn't going to that anymore. And I'm not going to stop eating candy. I don't care. Like, there's a lot of things I'll boycott, but candy's just not one of them.
We have morals and values, but also sweet tooth.
That's right. So in the 1960s, Robert Welsh, who founded the John Birch Society, he wrote that the civil rights movement was a communist hoax.
Oh, okay.
Not about freedom for people of color at all. It was obviously just a bunch of dirty hippies who wanted to start a communist state. And Fred Koch, who is the father of Charles and David, the Koch brothers, who most people do know about, was one of the earliest members of the group. And he wrote a book in 1960 while he was a member of this group that was called A Businessman Looks at Communism. And in that book, he wrote, "The colored man looms large in the communist plan to take over America."
Oh my God.
So I would like to point out that maybe they might have been a racist group.
Oh.
I mean, I'm just saying that maybe it's possible if you think that people fighting for their civil rights is a communist plot.
Right.
It might be, I don't know, it might have a racist tinge to it.
It sounds like if the members of the John Birch Society had been lost in a snowstorm, it would have been hard to find them because they were all white.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
I think that's correct.
All right, just checking.
But I would also point out that I don't think that you have to be... There are people now who talk about the John Birch Society and say, but they have Black members, they have Hispanic members. And I would like to point out that that doesn't mean that you aren't a racist organization.
Right.
Trump has worked with Black people. Trump has worked with, maybe worked with Hispanic people. But at the same time, there's a difference between respecting that person as an equal human being and being able to say, okay, as long as you stay in your lane, we don't have a problem.
Right.
It doesn't have to be overtly hostile to be racist.
Right. That's a good point.
So in 1965, the John Birch Society put forth a half-page ad in the Palm Beach Post titled, "The John Birch Society Asks, What's Wrong with Civil Rights?" In it, they denounced the civil rights movement as a communist-led effort with no slightest interest in really improving the lot of the American Negroes, but only in using the Negroes and the racial problem to promote communist purposes. And again, this is a half-page ad in the newspaper put forward before there were such a thing as political action committees.
Yeah. So this is like an early propaganda. I mean, there was propaganda already, obviously, with like World War II and everything, but this is why we're looking at this, is because this is an early example of fake news, of propaganda that was being pushed.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Because if you remember, it was in 1963 that police clashed in Birmingham, Alabama, and they used fire hoses. They set dogs on people that were attacked. And it was awful, and people saw that, and they really responded viscerally to it. It was a real changing point. Still very slow changing point, but it was a changing point.
Right.
So in 1963, around the time that happened, when those police clashes were becoming increasingly violent, the John Birch Society launched a nationwide campaign called Support Your Local Police.
Oh, like Blue Lives Matter.
That is exactly correct, because they opposed outside review of police conduct, and the campaign exists to this day. You can find it on their website, and they have already, since it started, they've mounted campaigns smearing the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
So they're still involved in this kind of race baiting tactics to this day.
So Blue Lives Matter has actually been around since the 60s. It just was called something else.
That's right. That's right.
Gotcha. Okay.
When I will say that I was doing this research, and then after I finished all of this, I was listening to the Murder Squad again, as we talked about last week. And when I was listening to it, one of the things they discussed was there's so many murders every year, but there's no database. There's no national database for murders that occur. Not just police murders, but actual, random murders that happen. There's no database. So that means that there's no way to quantify if you have a serial killer in your area or one that's traveling throughout the United States, because none of that information is connected. And one of the reasons that is because of groups like the John Birch Society making sure that we can't ever nationalize police information so that there can be a national-wide database so that we can put a name to some of these Jane Does and John Does. And we can catch some of these people that we know we could catch if we were able to, if we had a national database.
What?
Yeah.
What? Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, because they don't ever want which is crazy because to me, I feel like the FBI is sort of a national police, but not in the sense of they have all the data that the local police officers do.
And doesn't the FBI don't they have, isn't it like called CODIS or something where the police can send in the information?
Yes, but it is a voluntary system.
Yeah. Okay.
So if the police don't enter certain parameters, then it's not in there. And if you're a local, very small police force, then you don't have anything.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's just very disappointing that, there are better things to do with your time than to say that the police don't need outside reviews and they shouldn't be nationalized.
Okay. I feel like it reminds me of, we have all these cold cases being solved from familial DNA,
right,
from these places, and they're changing the rules to where now you have to opt in for your DNA to be used to be able to solve a crime. And you hear people saying, I would never get my DNA tested because blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you don't want murderers and rapists and people like to be caught. And you don't want people's, families to have that comfort of knowing at least, that the killer was caught or knowing a little bit more about what happened. Like, why is that a bad thing? Like, why wouldn't you want a rapist and murderer caught?
Yeah. I hear people give all kinds of excuses about that. And we can definitely get into that at a later time. Right. Because I always have my thoughts on that as well. But
it's just funny that even just talking about what you're talking about, it's like so relevant today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because that is kind of the reason that I wanted to start with these guys. And let's not get it twisted. It is like 95% white men. It is not, there's not a bunch of women running around. I mean, there are some women because obviously women can be awful.
Right.
We have no doubt. I mean, tons of women voted for Trump and are still out there on the Trump train being awful online. But this is 95% men who have created just this horrible rift in society. So we talked a little bit about Fred Koch, but Charles Koch was also a member of the John Birch Society, and he left in 1968 because he opposed their views on the Vietnam War. He did not believe that America should be in Vietnam War, largely because he is a America first type of person. He doesn't believe we should ever go to any other country.
Okay.
He had always been skeptical of the group's more far-fetched conspiracy theories, which included a belief that many prominent Americans, including President Dwight D. Eisenhower, were communist agents. There was even there were even a chapter in Texas that printed out. They basically had wanted flyers for JFK that say wanted for treason that were handed out the day that JFK was shot.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So, they're awful.
So you're saying that there's one thing that I have to agree with Charles Koch on? Is that
I
what
mean,
you're
yes.
saying? Okay.
Yes. And
Like,
that's,
for all
it's
his
okay.
faults, he at least saw crazy?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, he also used the way that JBS was run to his advantage and used that later for his own means, which I'll get into.
Okay.
When he left the membership, but he didn't actually stop working with them and worked in one of their publishing houses and bookstores. And he fashioned his prominent role in the rise of libertarianism on the model of the JBS Society, the John Birch Society, rather,
Right.
because the group was always very secretive about its membership. And that's exactly what he wanted, what Charles Koch wanted for the libertarian movement, is for it to be very as secretive as possible.
Okay. That makes total sense for a political, okay, sure.
Yeah, I mean,
That's how you win elections, right? By
right.
not
I mean,
letting
that's
people
what
know
has
who
led
are.
us to these political action committees not having to give any information about who's donating money. All of that comes back to the very secret society memberships of these groups from the 50s and 60s and 70s. By the early 70s, the John Birch Society had fully gone full conspiracy theory group. So they claimed that every non-conservative group, from environmentalists, peace activists, women's liberation movement, mainstream media, and the United Nations, were all in league with the Rothschilds, a very, very
Right.
wealthy Jewish family, and the Council on Foreign Relations. I would like to point out that nowadays the Rothschilds have been replaced with George Soros. There's always has to be this very rich boogeyman that you are fighting against who is trying to rule the world.
Right.
And that's what they thought that they were trying to do. So, speaking of crazy conspiracy theorists, Alex Jones, one of the more crazy and harmful of the conspiracy theorists, has called Trump a John Birch Society president on air. And
I was wondering,
claimed,
I was going to ask you if you knew if DJT was part of JBS.
Yeah, there's no evidence to say that he's a part of it, but it's certainly, from what I was able to find out, Alex Jones, who is friends with Trump,
Right.
he claims that they were both synced. That's his word, not mine. They were synced from when Jones was 5 years old, although he says that Trump was an adult man by that point, because both of their dads believed in the ideals of the John Birch Society. And they both subscribed to something called Western Goals, which is like,
oh, Jesus.
If you follow enough threads, you can find how they're attached, because there's a bunch of people from JBS who started the Western Goals. And I won't even get into it, but I will say that Patton was on the board of that. And it was very much like a conspiracy theory pamphlet type thing that you would get in the mail.
Okay, you're freaking me out now.
I know. It's the more you research, the more you feel like, am I a conspiracy theorist? Am I just making this up? But no, there's tons of evidence. And these people said these things because there's newspaper printings that people have from like their civil rights. And that's the thing, is they wrote tons of books and pamphlets and all kinds of things about this. They were just like the Ku Klux Klan, who did the same thing. They put out bunches and bunches of literature and songs and all kinds. I mean, Bob Dylan wrote a song about the John Birch Society.
Pro or con?
No, con.
Just wanted to clarify.
Con. A lot more people knew who they were back then. That's
right.
The thing, is now they're so behind the scenes now that you don't hear about them anymore. And they kind of get in with the Republicans, and then they kind of back out. And I mean, they've been at CPAC. They've co-hosted CPAC. Like they've never gone away. So that's something to think about, is that they're not defunct. The Tea Party movement saw a huge resurgence in JBS numbers, and their mission is largely the same. No government-funded healthcare, which they opposed Medicare in the 1960s as well.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, they hate anything where the government pays for your healthcare.
So they are libertarians.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. They want lower taxes, decreased government spending, and smaller government in general, except for women's rights. So go ahead and legislate our bodies to death.
Oh,
That's always free and easy. Just no legislation on white men who have
right.
lots of money. And, this shouldn't be surprising because some of the major forces behind the Tea Party is Americans for Posterity, which is funded by David and Charles Koch.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So JBS does currently publish something called The New American, which is like a news magazine that's largely online. And that's a super right-wing conservative news magazine. And just to give you a clue about how conservative this group is, they had an editorial 2 days after the Sandy Hook attack, where the guy blamed abortion culture and lax executions as possibly root causes of the Sandy Hook attack.
Oh, right. That makes no sense at all.
No. I mean, I don't even know how you get to that point in your brain unless you just really spin yourself out and, you got to really want it at that point. I don't know. I don't know how you do that. But I read that article or that editorial and it made me really upset. And so that's all I'm really going to say about them, The New American, because that you don't really need to go any farther than that. That's how bad they are. You don't even need to look up where they fall on Vanessa Otero's media bias chart, because let's just say they are in the bottom right.
Let's say
bottom right.
Call Soul Cycle because they're spinners.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things that JBS did is they changed the language as they became more modern. So their code words used to be everyone was a communist. Nowadays, they use the word globalist, which we hear now all the time.
Right.
They used to be very opposed to what they called their big conspiracy theory in the 70s was the New World Order. And so the New World Order has become deep state.
Okay. All right.
And anarchists, which they talked about, have become Antifa.
Right.
Immigrants have become the larger threat as opposed to civil rights protesters.
Right.
So there's always this fear-based, it's basically a fear-based economy for them. The more fear they can get, the more scared people get, the more they remember, white men are so oppressed right now, the more it's actually,
right.
That's how they get their membership. And that's how they spread the word of what they're doing. And so despite the fact that they just seem like a bunch of hoity-toity old men, really, these guys are, you look at Charles Koch, David Koch is dead, don't look at him. But Charles Koch, all of these people, they seem very golf course set, old, rich white men who shouldn't be wasting their time doing this, but are still wasting their time doing this. And remember that these are the mentors. These are the people that crazy people like Alex Jones and Glenn Beck, this is what they grew up on. This is why they believe the kind of stuff that they believe. And they posture these conspiracy theories as fact and use their influence to mold the government to their small-minded goals. And that's exactly what they've done for 60 years now.
And they have set the tone for putting out written propaganda and starting this kind of trend of misinformation and
yes, absolutely.
And disinformation. Absolutely. So.
And that is the John Birch Society.
Okay, well, I'm going to go take a break and stab myself in the eye and be right back because thanks.
We can keep fighting them. That's the thing is.
Yes. Yeah.
People forget and then just being reminded, oh, yeah, those guys are assholes.
Right.
Because you think, oh, well, the John Birch Society was around in the 60s and 70s, but they did kind of go dormant in the 80s because they were so conservative and crazy that no one really wanted to touch them. And then they came back, especially with the Tea Party movement. And so they're still kind of like sitting on the edge out there.
Well, I like the comparison that you make to what they were afraid of back then and what they're afraid of now. Because when you put it in those terms, if people can see that, well, hey, they were fighting Medicaid back then, and look at how well Medicaid is received now.
Right.
Like Medicaid and Medicare, like, I mean, people couldn't imagine not having that, right?
Yeah.
And so now when they're fighting, universal health care, well, hopefully in 50 years, people will be like, gosh, I can't believe they fought that. This is great.
Right.
Like, we need to make it better, right?
Exactly.
Well, ironically enough, I am going to talk to you about the Koch brothers.
Oh my gosh.
Now, just so everybody knows, we did plan this.
We did plan this part. Yeah.
This part
because planned. They really feed into one another.
Yeah. No, I think these two go really well together, and it kind of just sets the stage too for kind of what the Koch brothers have done by understanding the history of the John Birch Society. So it kind of feeds into it. But I will say, the Koch brothers, like, everything about them is fake, including how you say their name. I mean, it's spelled Koch. Why isn't it Koch?
Why isn't it Koch?
Why isn't it?
I mean, because that's what I would think if I was looking at it.
Koch. I don't know. It's like...
Yeah, I mean, it could end with a CH. I always looked at it and saw. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Koch brothers. Okay. So their dad, Fred, made a ton of money because he developed a new cracking method for the refinement of heavy crude oil into gasoline.
Right.
That's where they got their money from. And they have an oil company, basically. This is why they have so much money. So Charles was born in 1935. He's the chairman of the board and CEO for Koch Industries. David Koch, his other, the brother that just passed recently, he was executive vice president of Koch Industries. They also
Didn't Fred Koch, didn't he use some of that, like, didn't he sell some of that to the German army during Hitler's time?
Oh, I don't know. I really didn't dig into Dad.
I am pretty sure from the Dark Money book that I listened to from Jane Mayer, I really think that I'll look into that and I'll find out.
Okay.
I'll make sure.
Well, there's also two other brothers, Frederick and William, but they're really not involved in the political activities. So when you hear about the Koch brothers, you're really talking about Charles and David. And they have been active in American politics since at least 1980, when David Koch was the Libertarian president's vice presidential nominee. And they began to attract widespread attention from the media outlets in 2008, when through their family foundations, the brothers contributed to 34 political and policy organizations, 3 of which they founded and several of which they directed. Now, they've since organized a network of an estimated 500 libertarian and conservative donors, candidates, think tanks, and other groups. This information is all on the Wikipedia page about the Koch brothers.
Okay.
So, as an example of their influence, Jane Mayer, who's you're going to hear about throughout this. She is the yin to their yang. She is light to their dark. She noted that House Speaker John Boehner's appeal to David Koch in 2011 when Boehner needed votes to prevent a government shutdown. That's how influential they are in politics.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, kind of like you said, where David or Charles Koch left JBS when he found that he disagreed. I will say it does, like, they have their stances and they stick with them.
Oh, yeah.
So
you can't change their mind. They are not movable at all.
Right. So they're generally considered to be conservative, but they oppose George W. Bush on many issues. They are pro-choice. They support same-sex marriage. And they work closely with the Obama White House on criminal justice reform.
Right, because they're libertarians, right?
Right. They're libertarians, yes. So, and this is kind of where I focused on, is this is where they have really contributed to fake news.
Yeah.
They oppose climate change legislation.
Of course they do. Because all of their money comes from oil. And Go ahead. Tell me.
That was the big reveal.
Oh, But you said
I
the
had
dad did
pages
the
of
oil.
stuff to tell you, and that was the big reveal.
Sorry. But you said the dad was the oil refinery, the cracking technique?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this all comes down to money for them.
Yeah.
So let me tell you how we get there.
Okay. Tell me how we get there.
So they have funded anthropogenic climate change skeptic Willie Soon, who received $230,000 from the Charles G. Koch charitable foundations.
Mm-hmm.
They also help fund Americans for Prosperity, which you already mentioned, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the CO2 Coalition, and the Manhattan Institute, which all of these have been active in questioning global warming.
Right.
And so this is where I'm focusing because, Kelly, why would a CEO and executive VP of an oil company want to cover up climate change?
Do they have anything to do with farming as well?
Probably.
Because
they're
industrial farms, like those big farms, are a big contributor to pollution in our waterways as well. So it would make sense. And I can't say for sure, but I feel like I remember reading that one of the Koch brothers was very invested in like these huge farms.
Probably. I mean, they are invested everywhere because they literally did create this network of people. Like they basically came up with like their playbook on how to invest your money to support the candidates that you want to support. And they taught all of these people that had money and wanted to donate politically to their types of causes. They taught them their playbook, right? So they have a piece of the pie like around the world. But there is an article from The Guardian, and this is, I did go kind of back in time, okay?
Right.
This article is from March 30th, 2010, and it's called U.S. Oil Company Donated Millions to Climate Skeptic Groups, says Greenpeace. So this is back in 2010. I'm going to take you back for a moment.
Okay.
Obama was president. We didn't know about crazy Donald Trump.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like those things hadn't happened yet. So this is back in 2010. And we already knew at that point that they gave $73 million to climate skeptic groups spreading inaccurate and misleading information.
Right.
So it says in this article, the company's network of lobbyists, former executives, and organizations has created a forceful stream of misinformation that Koch-funded entities produce and disseminate. The propaganda is then replicated, repackaged, and echoed many times throughout the Koch-funded web of political fronts and think tanks, said Greenpeace. Koch Industries is playing a quiet but dominant role in the global warming debate. This private, out-of-sight corporation has become a financial kingpin of climate science denial and clean energy opposition. On repeated occasions, organizations funded by Koch foundations have led the assault on climate scientists and science, green jobs, renewable energy, and climate policy progress. This, when you think about those statements, that is, if the world had understood and listened, those are severe.
Right. They have done more harm to the earth than any other people have ever done, even during the Industrial Revolution. Because it's just these two people.
Yeah. Well, it is, but they created, they're at the top, but they created this network.
Correct.
So here are the top 10 Koch beneficiaries from 2005 to 2008. So now let's go back to 2005.
Okay.
George Bush was president. Okay. Emeritus Center. Have you ever heard?
The Emeritus Center?
It's MERCATUS. Emeritus Center. 9.2 million received in those 3 years.
Yeah.
They're a conservative think tank at George Mason University, and this group suggested in 2001 that global warming would be beneficial in winter and at the poles. In 2009, they recommended nothing be done to cut emissions. American.
Just nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
We don't need to do nothing.
No.
Oh
American for Prosperity has gotten $5.17 million, and they have built opposition to clean energy and climate legislation with events across the U.S. The Institute for Humane Studies, $1.96 million. They have several prominent climate skeptics have positions there. So Fred Singer and Robert Bradley are mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Heritage Foundation, $1.62 million. They lead the U.S. in opposition to climate change science. The Cato Institute, $1.02 million. Again, they dispute science behind climate change and questions the rationale for taking action.
Right.
And then the Manhattan Institute got $800,000. They regularly publish client science denials. And then there's the Washington Legal Foundation, the Federalist Society for Law, the National Center for Policy Analysis, and the American Council on Science and Health. All of these getting extra money and all of them denying climate change. So now there's another Guardian article. This one's back from 2015. So a little bit newer, but it talks about the work of a prominent climate change denier was funded by the energy industry. And this is about Willie Soon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he's important because he was a researcher at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Doesn't that sound good? The Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics?
It does. It does. But I know where this is going. So tell me.
Doesn't it sound like he would maybe be a prominent scientist that should be believed? Yeah. So he does not accept that rising greenhouse gas emissions since the industrial age are causing climate changes. He contends that climate change is driven by the sun. Now, there was a link in the article to that to see what he believes. And I will say at this point that link doesn't work. And I Googled it and tried to find it. And basically you can't get to that information. At least I couldn't. And I kind of think that's probably a good thing at this point.
Right.
It seems like some of this information at least has been scrubbed. And again, I wanted to start going back and working our way forward. So I am looking at some older articles. So it says in the relatively small universe of climate denial, Soon, with his Harvard Smithsonian credentials, was a sought-after commodity. He was cited admiringly by Senator James Inhofe, the Oklahoma Republican who famously called global warming a hoax. He was called to testify when Republicans in the Kansas state legislature tried to block measures promoting wind and solar power. The Heartland Institute, a hub of climate denial, gave Soon a Courage Award.
Oh.
You know, for his courage in denying.
It takes so much courage to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's also a Wikipedia page on him. And
I want to know what that award looks like. Is it just the earth on fire?
I think it's actually a very nice glass, clear piece, and it says courage on it. I'm not sure.
Maybe a cat.
I didn't
hanging from a tree, just like, have courage.
Yeah, I didn't look for that. But they, on this, it says he was a Malaysian astrophysicist and aerospace engineer employed as a part-time researcher at the Solar and Stellar Physics Division of the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. So when you hear it that way, it doesn't sound quite as impressive as, you know, what you maybe think at first.
Right. Like he is a professor at this institute. So can I just do a very quick sidebar and read you something from Dark Money that might explain why they did some of this and why that sounds so impressive?
Yes.
So Jay Mayer's book, which I've used as one of my jams of the week, so I won't use it again this week.
Right.
But please go read it. If you're interested at all in either one of these topics, just go read it. So, okay, this is the quote from almost the beginning of the book. George Pearson, a former member of the John Birch Society in Wichita, who served as Charles Koch's political lieutenant during these years, and I'll just sidebar and say he was his political lieutenant for over 30 years.
Okay.
Expanded on this strategy in his eye-opening paper. He suggested that libertarians needed to mobilize youthful cadres by influencing academia in new ways. Traditional gifts to universities, he warned, didn't guarantee enough ideological control. Instead, he advocated funding private institutions within prestigious universities, where influence over hiring decisions and other forms of control could be exerted by donors while hiding the radicalism of their aims. As Clayton Copen summarized Pearson's arguments, it would be necessary to use ambiguous and misleading names, obscure the true agenda, and conceal the means of control. This is the method that Charles Koch would soon practice in his charitable giving and later in his political actions. So,
Yep.
Harvard, Smithsonian Institute on Astrophysics,
Right.
that sounds exactly like what they would do, just like Americans for Prosperity.
Right.
And the Heritage Foundation.
Well, I will say that the Smithsonian and Harvard had both said, we don't believe what he's saying at all.
Yeah.
They don't support any of this. But basically, Soon and this guy that he did this study with, Baliunas, they published this paper saying that, the sun's the problem. It's like solar variation rather than human activity.
Right.
And 13 scientists published a refutation of the paper. They raised three main objections. One is that they used data reflective of changes in moisture rather than temperature. They failed to distinguish between regional and hemispheric mean temperature anomalies. And they reconstructed past temperatures from proxy evidence not capable of resolving trends. And then the other thing that they came under fire for is that they did not disclose that their research budget was funded in part by the American Petroleum Institute. So that is Willie Soon in a nutshell.
Right.
Lots going on there.
Yes.
So then I'm going to direct you to 2013, a New Yorker article by our friend Jane Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
Koch pledge tied to congressional climate inaction. Oh, this sucks. Okay. So a 2-year study by the Investigative Reporting Workshop at American University, which was released back in 2013, talks about what happened. Now, I will tell you again, that link does not work anymore. And I could not pull up this study.
Okay.
But here's what it says. Here's what the article says.
Okay.
Climate change policy directly affects Koch Industries' bottom line. Yeah,
absolutely.
Koch Industries, according to the EPA statistics cited in the study, is a major source of carbon dioxide emissions, the kind of pollution that most scientists believe causes global warming. And in 2011, according to the EPA's greenhouse gas reporting database, the company, which has oil refineries in 3 states, emitted over 24 million tons of carbon dioxide, as much as typically emitted by 5 million cars. So starting in 2008, a year after the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA could regulate greenhouse gases as a form of pollution, accelerating possible congressional action on climate change, the Kochs funded a nonprofit group, Americans for Prosperity, and devised the No Climate Tax Pledge.
Oh, yeah.
And it has been, according to the study, a component of a remarkably successful campaign to prevent lawmakers from addressing climate change. So 2 successive efforts to control greenhouse gas emissions by implementing cap-and-trade energy bills died in the Senate, the latter of which was specifically targeted by this pledge. So it says, by now, 411 current office holders nationwide have signed the pledge. It includes the entire Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, a third of the members of the House of the Representatives as a whole, and a quarter of U.S. senators.
Yeah, this reminds me of the Grover Norquist no raising taxes pledge.
Right. Okay. So now we go to the Washington Post. And this is also from 2013. This one is called Billionaire Koch Brothers Use Web to Take on Media Reports They Dispute. So this is where they really start maybe using a little bit of a different tactic to combat what they're starting to attack the media. Okay.
Right.
So it says this: faced with news articles they considered flawed or biased, the brothers and their lieutenants don't just send strongly worded letters to the editor in protest. Instead, the company takes the offensive with detailed responses that oscillate between correcting, shaming, and slamming journalists who've written unflattering stories about the company or the Koch's myriad political and philanthropic activities. A typical Koch facts headline from May: New Yorker's Jane Mayer distorts the facts and misleads readers again. If Koch facts is any indication, the Kochs take a rather dim view of the news media, or at least some parts of it. This website denounces reporters from mainstream organizations for having an agenda, often liberal, in reporting on the Kochs and their company. If the Kochs have a public enemy number one in the media, it is most assuredly Mayer, a writer for the New York Magazine. Koch Facts now denounces Mayer even before her stories appear. In a posting in May 18th, the website predicted that a forthcoming Mayer article about David Koch's involvement in public television will be another attempt to smear us while advancing her partisan agenda. But that was just a guess. As the anonymous author of the post admitted, we don't precisely know the content of her story. Now, the Koch's long-running argument with Mayer comes complete with a subplot. In late 2010, you're going to love this, Kelly.
Oh.
The conservative website Daily Caller began checking an explosive allegation that Mayer had plagiarized some of her passages in Covert Operations and in an unrelated article she wrote a decade earlier. The website never published a story about them, although it was never clear where the allegations came from. The timing of them and the extensive research that appeared to go into them suggested to people at the New Yorker that someone was working overtime to discredit Mayer. The Koch's representative said they had no knowledge of plagiarism allegations. Mayer and the New Yorker say the allegations are false. This is where you're really going to love this.
Oh, yeah?
Tucker Carlson, the Daily Caller's editor-in-chief.
I love any time his name is mentioned.
Said in an interview that he doesn't remember who gave his website that original tip about Mayer, but Carlson said the source is immaterial. Every story idea winds up with an agenda behind it, he said. I'd be happy to take a story from Satan himself as long as it was true.
But he just said the source material isn't relevant. So,
yeah.
God, I hate him.
I know.
I mean, how do you judge whether it's true if you don't know where the information came from?
Right.
How do you judge?
So I will say this again, this is something that has maybe taken a turn since this was written, because this was from 2013. I could not find kochfacts.com. It doesn't, that website does not exist anymore. They do have a Twitter under that name, but you have to be a follower to see the tweets. And I think that Koch Facts may still exist, but it's something that's like within the company at this point. It's not just a public website.
Yeah, it might just also be one of those subscription newsletter type things.
I mean, it used to be, back when this was written, it was kochfacts.com. Like they had links and everything, but it doesn't pull anything up anymore. So they have moved it to be a little bit more, I think, private.
Well, I mean, that's their MO, is to make everything as secretive and private as possible, so you know as little as possible.
That's what this seems like. So, and I will say that this again was back in 2013. This is back before pre-Donald Trump, and this is the start of liberal media, slamming.
Right.
I mean, this is what he does to a T.
Well, I will say that the John Birch Society, even back in the 70s when they were going into their conspiracy theories, they also talked about mainstream media being an enemy.
Right.
And that they were spreading communist beliefs and ideals. Because, I mean, remember, it was the founder of the John Birch Society who very much on multiple occasions called President Eisenhower a communist.
Right. So there's been a lot of, Jane Mayer is not the only person who's looked into the Koch brothers. There's actually a Wikipedia page called Koch Brothers Exposed. And it's about, there was a 2012 US documentary compiled by liberal political activist and filmmaker Robert Greenwald that basically put together this documentary. And I just have a kind of a breakdown real quick of some of the things that they've also done in addition to spreading a ton of fake news about climate. They've allegedly put in efforts to gut Social Security, spending more than $28 million. The Kochs have funded hundreds of reports, commentaries, and books asserting that Social Security is on the brink of collapse.
Right. That's just something people say now, right? Is, Social Security, there's not going to be anything left when we're older. It's on the brink of collapse. It's just something people say without even really realizing what they're saying.
Right.
And you're just like, no, it doesn't have to be on the brink of collapse. It's just someone has been saying that for so long, it becomes part of that cultural zeitgeist of, that's just something we say now.
Yeah.
Just like they were very much behind how people will say, well, both sides are just as bad. All politicians are corrupt. It's not just one side. A lot of that came from John Birch Society and came from the Koch brothers and all these foundations that they've had since the 70s because they've been plugging that in. It's very scary how just these little sentences and ideas get into culture and then it's hard to shake them.
Right. Well, they've also done attempts at resegregation. And the film alleges Koch-funded efforts to remake a North Carolina school district's diversity policy, which some see as effectively resegregating the schools. There's alleged voter suppression. Koch money has supported voter ID laws in 38 states. These laws are billed as a way to avoid voter fraud, but the film argues they are actually intended to make it more difficult for Democrats to vote. I'd agree with that.
I would agree with that too.
And they mentioned the Keystone XL pipeline. The Kochs used their influence to sway legislation regarding the Keystone XL pipeline. And the Koch Industries has a significant financial interest in this oil and gas project. Mm-hmm. Cancer in CrossFit. It has been alleged that a Koch paper plant pollutes the air and the water of a community in Arkansas. The film explores a link with cancer cluster in this small African-American community. Mm-hmm. And then higher education. The Kochs give millions of dollars to university, which the film alleges are given with the stipulation that the schools must hire Koch sympathetic professors.
Right.
Yeah.
Which goes back to that.
So the last thing I'm going to go over is there was actually an article that just came out August 13th, 2019.
Okay.
By Jane Mayer in The New Yorker. And it's talking about a new documentary called Kochland. It says Kochland examines the Koch brothers' early critical role in climate change denial. So this guy, I'm sorry, it's not a documentary, it's a book. He's a business reporter, Christopher Leonard. And he manages to dig up valuable new material, including the evidence of the Koch's role in perhaps the earliest known organized conference of climate change deniers, which gathered just as a scientific consensus on the issue when the issue was beginning to gel. The meeting in 1991 was sponsored by the Cato Institute. We've heard that name before.
Yes.
A Washington-based libertarian think tank, which the Kochs founded and heavily funded for years. As Leonard describes it, Charles Koch and other fossil fuel magnates sprang into action that year after President George H.W. Bush announced that he would support a treaty limiting carbon emissions, a move that posed a potentially devastating threat to the profits of the Koch industries. At that time, Bush was not an outlier in the Republican Party. Like the Democrats, the Republicans largely accepted the scientific consensus on climate change, reflected in the findings of expert groups such as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which had formed in 1988 under the auspices of the United Nations. Kochland is important, Davies said, because it makes it clear that you would have a carbon tax or something better today if not for the Kochs. They stopped anything from happening back when there was still time.
Right.
Anyway, there's a little bit more here I want to read. So, magnifying the Koch's power was their network of allied donors, anonymously funded shell groups, think tanks, academic centers, and nonprofit advocacy groups, which Koch insiders referred to as their echo chamber. Leonard also reports that the centrist think tank Third Way quietly worked with the Kochs to push back against efforts to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, which could have affected their business importing oil from Canada. Frequently and by design, the Koch brothers' involvement was all but invisible. Koch Industries regarded any compromise that might reduce fossil fuel consumption as unacceptable. Protecting its fossil fuel profits was and remains the company's top political priority. Leonard shows that the Kochs, to achieve this end, worked to hijack the Tea Party movement and eventually the Republican Party itself. Meanwhile, after the cap-and-trade bill died, the planet continued heating, and the Kochs' net worth doubled. Dun, dun, dun.
It's amazing how you can link back, like, our planet just having a chance and then having that chance taken away by one family.
Right.
Because of greed.
Right.
And this is absolutely... What do you do with $50 billion? I mean, David Koch died with $50 billion in his estate. You can't take that with you. That's more money than anyone could spend in a lifetime.
Right.
It's just the kind of unbelievable greed that comes from... I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where you get that kind of greed. Because I will tell you, remember when I asked if Fred Koch worked with Hitler?
Right.
So I went back to his Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
And it turns out that in 1929, he was being sued. His company, Fred Koch's company, which was called Winkler Koch back then, was being sued because someone in the United States said that their company came up with this thermal cracking technique first, and that they had stolen it from this company. So they lost originally the lawsuit, and they couldn't do business in the United States because of this loss. So they went to Russia and worked with Stalin, which they later regretted, but they helped Stalin's regime set up 15 modern oil refineries. Over time, Stalin brutally purged several Koch Soviet colleagues. Koch was deeply affected by the experience and regretted his collaboration. I mean, he killed millions of people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would hope you would regret it. But apparently he didn't learn his lesson, because the company also built installations in countries throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and they partnered with William Rhodes Davis to build the third largest oil refinery serving the Third Reich.
Gotcha.
So he didn't just work with the Nazis. He worked with Stalin as well.
Awesome.
So his project was actually personally approved by Adolf Hitler in Germany.
Wow.
So that's where they made their money. So anytime anyone's like, oh, but the Kennedys made their money from bootlegging, at least they didn't make their money by working with Hitler and Stalin.
Right. Well, I will say that one thing you can do with $50 billion is maybe establish a colony on Mars, which they're going to have to do because they ruined this planet. So I guess, I mean, in a roundabout way, that's one way to do it. But we could have just maybe not ruined this planet and then you wouldn't need the $50 billion. So either way, I mean, we are on this timeline, so I guess we're going to just have to go with that. But hey, this was fun.
Yeah. Okay. So we should probably do something to bring it back up. Bring it back up on topics. And I think I went first last week with our jam of the week. Yeah. So what's your jam of the week?
My jam of the week is an oldie but goodie. It's the song Home by Philip Phillips, which you probably hear on a million different commercials every day.
I feel like I know this song. Is it kind of folky? Does it have like some clapping in it?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
No, right. Not really clapping. No, you're thinking of a different Home song.
I probably am.
You're thinking of the one by Edward Shapiro and the Magnetos, which I love that song.
Sure. Sure. I believe you.
This is, I'm not going to sing on the podcast. I don't want to lose listeners. But I have the link and you can listen to it. But my daughter pulled up this song today and I was like, oh, I do love that song. And it's just a very like welcome home song.
Yeah.
And gonna make this place your home. So I'm all into home building right now. I like it. So
you do a lot of stuff. I used to be a very DIY around my house and I need to get back into it because I have multiple undone projects, but I see you doing stuff all the time and it's very impressive.
You know, you are the second person to say that to me today, so I don't know what's going on. It's full moon, but thank you.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't deserve that praise right now because I haven't picked up a paintbrush in like a month and I need to, but I do. I do a lot around the house. That is true. So anyway, that is my jam of the week. And Kelly, take us away.
Yeah. So my jam of the week isn't super, super happy, but it is something I've been really into. So I've been on a little bit of a Caitlin Doty's binge. She does the YouTube Ask a Mortician. She's also written several books, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and From Here to Eternity. And she has a brand new book out. But I actually am here to plug and say my jam of the week, because I binged them all this week, is her podcast that she does with two other female morticians. And it's called Death in the Afternoon. I was only able to find it on Spotify. I couldn't find it on Stitcher, which is what I normally listen to my podcasts on.
Okay.
But it's so good. And I loved it. They tell stories. They answer questions. They answer really weird questions that people have about dying or about mortuary services. And then they tell stories about things like, you know, how all the feet wash up on shore. Yeah. And people are like, oh, is it a serial killer who's like taking feet? Which doesn't make sense because you wouldn't find the feet if he was taking the feet. But they go into why that happens. And they talk about plenty of different things. And I just really, it's interesting. I'm very interested in trying to be more death positive and stop being so afraid of it, knowing what's coming. And it's really good for that. It's really good to just sort of be like, yes, this is something we're all going to do. And it's good not to put your head in the sand about it and just get an idea of, okay, well, if it happens, what do I want to have done?
Right.
You know, how do I want my body to be treated? Because there are so many different options now. So it's not just cremation and embalmment, burial in a casket 6 feet under. It doesn't have to be all of that anymore.
Right. So I want to be in one of those tree urns. They have these urns that you bury basically, and it's a tree. It grows a tree with your ashes or whatever. Yeah. I want like something to return my body to the earth. I do not want to be in a casket where you're embalmed and like, why does my body need to be saved after I'm dead? Yeah. Unless I was murdered. And they haven't caught the killer, fine.
Yes. but they can still do all the things they need to do. And you can, I mean, that's sort of what she'll talk about that. She's a big proponent of a natural burial, which is kind of what you're talking about is cremation. And then they put your ashes in a tree. But she talks a lot about natural burial where you're just wrapped in a shroud, placed into the ground about 3.5 feet down, and your body is actually, you're able to feed the, all the bacteria and the wildlife that comes in. And give back to the earth.
Seriously, throw me out back. I don't care. Just throw me in the ground. I don't want all that. I mean, I don't know. I don't even really need a headstone. Not my thing.
Yeah, it's not my thing either.
I got pictures.
But yeah, it's been really interesting and it's opened my mind to the possibilities of certain things that exist. Because I've always thought it was either casket or cremation, and that was it.
Yeah. Nice. Well, very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys like this episode, we are going to be doing this series. We're just blown away by the amount of people we have found to talk about who have helped create this family tree of fake news.
Yeah.
A fake news family tree.
Right, exactly. And once you start looking at like, oh, who should we talk about? You're like, okay, well, who shouldn't we talk about at a certain point? There's so many.
Yeah. So this is going to be a series that of course we'll interrupt it as needed when something really important comes up or fun or whatever. I mean, we just do whatever we want to do anyway. Like, it's not like
you can't tell us what to do. You're not the boss. Wait, you kind of are the bosses of us. If you don't like this, please let us know because we will do something different.
Yeah. So anyway, you can find us podcastfakenews.com. That's where our blog is. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Podcast Fake News. And you can email us complaints or praise at podcastfakenews@gmail.com. And follow us, rate, review, subscribe, give us 5 stars so more people can find us. And
tell your friends about us. Share us on Facebook after we launch an episode. We love all of that.
Yeah. And we have fixed our, I really think we have fixed our marketing on Facebook with the ads.
I think so too.
And the last few ads have gone much, much better. And I've gotten some good people. We're actually up to over 200 people now liking the Facebook page.
That's fantastic.
So we hit a milestone.
Yeah. Were we at 100 last year around this time?
I don't know if it's around this time, but 100 was definitely a milestone as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yay us. Thank you guys all for liking our page and listening. We really appreciate it. We do a lot of work to put this together. It's just Beth and I. There's no producers. We don't have anybody who makes it special, but I mean, you guys make it special. So thank you for listening.
Yeah. And until next time, spread jam.
Not lies.